The bell on the courthouse porch rang thin and sour across Jericho Ridge. Dawn had not burned the night away yet. Dust hung in the square, soft as smoke-turning boots the color of ash. The banner for the Founders' Draw sagged on its rope. Men laughed with whiskey on their breath. Women kept their eyes on the ground. Lila Hart stood to the side of the steps. Her fingers pinched the edge of a shawl gone shiny at the corners. Her stepmother, Vivian Pike, leaned in so close Lila could smell rose oil over starch. Smile, darling. No one pays full price for a frown. Lila did not smile. She stared at the courthouse door. A notice was nailed beside it, black ink on sun-bleached paper. Marriages must be registered within 30 days at the Gallatin County office. The nail head had rusted. The words had not. Judge Malcolm Avery came out in a black coat with a white carnation pressed flat at the lapel. He smiled with his teeth, not his eyes. Sheriff Tom Gaines followed a step behind. Deputy Reed Hollis leaned on the rail and watched the crowd as if it might run. A brown felt hat passed from hand to hand, names folded small as seeds. The judge raised the hat. "Founders' Draw," he said. "By law and tradition." He reached in. The paper made a dry sound. He read names, a whoop here, a hiss there. A woman sobbed behind a gloved hand. Lila did not hear the others. She watched the judge's mouth shape the letters when he found hers. Lila Hart. He paused, let the air tighten. Elias Voss. The sound in the square went sideways. Some men lifted their chins as if testing a change in the wind. Elias Voss was hard to miss. He stood taller than the men around him, hat brim pulled low, a jaw gone rough from a day too long. He had a scar along the ridge of his left hand, pale as chalk against sunskin. He stepped forward. He did not smile. He did not leer. He tipped his hat once as if at weather he respected. "Pack what you need," he said, voice low from disuse. "The road is long." Vivian breathed through her teeth. "Remember me when you stand in a bigger kitchen," she said, without moving her painted lips. Lila turned from her. She did not have much to pack. A comb with 2 teeth missing a cotton dress folded twice a wooden locket with a mother's face inside. The house did not hold anything else that belonged to her. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, the wagon was already leaving the square. The wheels groaned. The boards creaked. Dust climbed the spokes, then climbed her throat. Elias sat at the reins, a shape cut from shadow and light. He passed a tin cup with coffee gone bitter and cold. He passed a strip of jerky wrapped in waxed paper. "Eat," he said. "The road does not care if you are hungry." "Thank you," she said. The words scraped like a door not opened in years. They rode. The prairie lay open. Grass shone the dull gold of a coin passed too many hands. A hawk hung above it, all the sky, a pale blue plate. The smell of sage rose in small breaths as the wheels broke it. "You are quiet," he said after a time. "I do not know what to say," she said. "Then you do not have to say it," he answered. "Silence is work too." At noon, the light went white. Heat climbed the wagon seat and pressed under her dress. Elias pulled the team beneath a patch of cottonwood's leaves, clattering like tin in a wind too thin to see. He let the horses drink. He took off his hat and wiped his brow with his sleeve, a slow motion, nothing wasted. Lila watched his hands. There was no tremor, no rush. "Have you done this before?" she asked. "Done what?" "Taken a name from a hat." "First time," he said. He looked out past the trees to the line of hills. "Not the last thing I came to do in this town, but the only one that mattered when I saw you standing there." She felt her throat close. "I do not want to owe anyone," she said. "Then pay me by breathing," he said. "Take that back first." Clouds had been building since morning, small at first, then stacking, then joining. By late afternoon, the sky on the far side of the Bridger Range went bruised dark. The wind changed. The horses threw their heads. The smell of rain came up from the earth, sharp metal at the back of the tongue. "Storm," Elias said. "There is an old chapel not far. We will make it if we do not stop." They did not stop. The first fat drops hit hard enough to sting. The road turned slick, then slicker. The wheels threw mud against the boards. The chapel stood where the land rose and then forgot how to rise a heap of gray wood with a cross that leaned as if tired of carrying its own weight. Inside, the air smelled of cedar long gone dry, pews listing at odd angles, a bird's nest tucked in the place where a hymn number once hung. Elias shook the water from his hat and set it on the end of a bench. He knelt and made a small fire from wood he broke from a split pew. The flames took slow, then quick. Heat pushed the damp from the air. "You are cold," he said. He did not ask. He took a wool blanket from his pack and held it out, eyes on the fire. "Thank you," she said again, softer this time. The blanket scratched her cheek the way only old wool can. It felt like something that had kept other people living. They sat across from each other, firelight cutting their faces into planes and shadow. Lila studied him without the brim of his hat in the way. He was not a handsome man. He was a sturdy one. There was grief at the corners of his mouth that had settled there long enough to have its own shape. "You miss her," Lila said. The words surprised her. They were warm and plain once they left her mouth. He did not ask who. He watched the fire a long breath. Every day, he said. Thunder spoke above them loud enough to shake a bit of plaster from the ceiling. Lila flinched. Her fingers crushed the edge of the blanket. Elias reached across the space and touched her wrist. Not a grip, not a claim. A weight like the touch you put on a frightened animal so it knows you are real. "Sorry," he said, drawing his hand back. "Habit, not permission." "You did not frighten me," she said. "I'm not used to anyone being careful." "You will be," he said. Rain ran down the walls in thin threads. Wind hummed in the cracks and then fell away. The fire clicked and settled on itself and kept on burning. Lila closed her eyes for a while. When she opened them, the world had turned the color after a storm, that strange pale where every edge is too clear. Dawn slid a ribbon of gold across the broken roof. Elias had gone out to the wagon. She stood at the doorway and watched him fit the harness back on the team. He moved slow so as not to spook them, hand on the collar voice, a low string of sounds with no words in them. He glanced up, saw her there, nodded. "Ready, Miss Hart?" She nodded back. She was. By mid-morning, the rain had packed the dust down. The road to Cinder Hollow left the main trail and crossed a shallow stream. The water ran brown and fast, then went flat and quiet past a stand of scrub willow. The ranch sat low in a swell of land. A line of fence leaned toward the wind. 2 barns wore their years like old men who do not apologize for their backs. "This will be yours," he said, pushing open a door to a small room with a quilt on the bed and a trunk at the foot. The window looked toward the corral. "You can lock it from the inside. No one opens that door unless you say." "And you?" she asked. "The bunkhouse," he said, "or the loft. I am nearby if you shout, not nearer." A black dog with one torn ear came into the doorway and wagged its whole hind end. He looked at Lila as if he had been expecting her. The sound that left her mouth was a laugh so small she would have missed it if it had not warmed her ribs. Scout Elias said, "He is not much for strangers." "Maybe I am not one," Lila said. Elias's eyes softened in a way that made him look younger. He set her small bundle on the trunk and stepped away. "Coffee is on the stove. Bread is in the tin." He paused, searching for a word he did not use often. "Welcome." She lay the wooden locket in the top drawer and closed it. The room held a quiet that did not need to be defended. She stood still just to see if it would stay. It stayed. Outside, Elias led the horses toward the pasture. He did not look back at the house. A man on a pale roan watched from the ridge above the creek, the shape of him cut sharp against the washed sky. Deputy Reed Hollis lit a cigarette and tipped the ash with his thumb. Gray drifted down and vanished into the wet grass. Morning at Cinder Hollow came with the thin bite of coffee and the sweet of cornbread going dry on the stove. The room kept its quiet like a promise. Lila took her time with the first cup, held the tin warm in both hands, and listened to the yard. Hooves against dirt. A latch lifted and set down. Scout shook himself at the threshold so hard his tags clicked. She set the cup away and stepped out. The air had that after-storm smell, a clean slice through the nose with something mineral under it. Elias was at the corral, a length of rope looped into his palm. The team turned out and rolling their backs in damp dust. He tipped his hat without stopping. "You slept," he said. "I did," she said. The word felt new. "If you want to walk," he added, "the dog will keep you out of gopher holes." Scout took this as truth and trotted beside her, shoulder to knee. The pasture dropped toward a trickle of water braided with willow. Cotton from last season lay caught in the wire little ghosts. She set her hand to the fence post and pushed. It gave a little, then held. In the afternoon she asked for a strip of dirt by the porch. Elias studied the ground, then the sun, then the wind that combed the grass flat. He brought tools and began to square it off, measuring and measuring again the tape silver as a fish in the light. "You have measured that line 3 times, Lila said, the corner of her mouth softening to spite herself. "Wind here likes to pick on the weak," he said. "A fence that leans today falls tomorrow." He dug while she sifted. The soil was dark where last year's leaves had gone to rot. Seeds clicked into her palm from a muslin pouch, smooth and small. Juniper watched from the fence ears, going forward and back in slow thoughts. Lila pressed beans and dill into the dirt and pulled soil over them with her fingers. The earth held cool. It smelled of water that had not seen the light yet. By late day, Elias brought the mare out and looped the reins over the rail. Juniper stood as if carved until Lila reached up. Then the horse breathed out and softened through the ribs. Elias set the saddle blanket in place and waited. "You do not have to," he said. "I know," she said. He laced his fingers and let her use his hands as a step. When she settled, he walked at the knee steady, talking to Juniper more than to Lila. "Breathe in and sit light. Let your hands remember before your feet do." The mare felt half alive, half creek water and current, and the fence line moved past like a slow river. Lila felt the old tight place behind her ribs fight her, then ease a finger's width. They stopped at the yard, and Elias set 3 dented cans on a split fence post. He opened the cylinder of a Colt, checked the chambers, and handed it to Lila Butt first. "You do not point it at what you want to keep," he said. "The gun is weight and noise, and your hand is the gate. If you miss a can, you do not miss the quiet." She lifted the gun with 2 hands and felt the pull in her wrist. He stood a yard to the side and set his eyes on the cans, not on her. "Breathe out, then squeeze. Do not snatch at it." She let out a long breath. The first shot split the dry quiet and left a sting in her palms. The can rocked and stayed. She tried again. The second round clipped the edge. Tin rang. She could feel the noise in the small bones of her ear. A third shot. The can flipped end over end and hit dirt. "Good," Elias said. His voice did not jump up to meet the moment. It was as level as a table. "That is enough for today." She nodded and set the Colt down safe on the post. Scout went to nose the fallen can as if it might run again. A wagon rolled up the track a week later, paint faded to a guess, and the back stacked with boxes marked with chalk. Dr. Ruth Calder climbed down and pushed her hat back with one finger. She had a face that looked like she had set many bones, and closed her eyes for none of them. Lila stood in the doorway with flour on her hands and a smudge on her cheek she did not know about. The doctor's smile made that not matter. "You must be Lila Hart," Ruth said. "I am Ruth. I bring poultices and gossip. The poultices work." Elias came from the barn and shook the doctor's hand and stepped back to let her through. Ruth washed her hands in the yard and asked Lila to sit where the light hit clean. Fingers gentle, she mapped old bruises that had gone green to yellow and showed Lila how to wrap her own ribs when they spoke up on bad weather days. "Any headaches?" Ruth asked. "Any spells where the floor seems to move?" "Sometimes," Lila said, "when it gets too loud in my head." Ruth nodded. She packed small packets of willow bark and comfrey in a tin and set it in Lila's hands. "You will keep this. You will also keep your food for yourself, and you will walk when the air is nice. If anyone argues, you tell them the doctor said the rules have changed." Ruth's gaze flicked to the counter where the county notice lay flattened under a coffee cup ring. 30 days to register a marriage at the Gallatin office. Her mouth made a line. "That paper is a snare," she said. "Men use it to turn a person into a thing." Elias's shoulders went tight. "We have not been to Gallatin," he said. "I do not like the hook in that line." "I have friends," Ruth said. "In Red Butte, there is a marshal who throws his badge where it belongs, not where a judge points. I will send word that Jericho Ridge is sick with a tradition." She said it without heat. She said it like a measurement. She stayed for Stu told stories about babies who waited for storms, and an old miner who would not sit still for stitches. Lila watched the doctor's hands and the way Elias listened. When Ruth left, the place felt more like a house and less like an arrangement. On market day, Lila loaded eggs into a crate padded with rag and rode in on the wagon seat while Elias walked beside the team for the first stretch, then fell back to check the harness and the rear wheel. The square looked different when she was not on the steps with a hat full of names in front of her. A boy sold penny licorice and never stopped talking. A woman she did not know weighed the eggs with care and put sugar in Lila's bag without counting it twice. Whispers rode ahead of her and settled behind. You see her. That is the one from the drawing. She kept her eyes on the table on the way flour dust sat in the cracks like snow that would not melt. Across the street, the courthouse wall took the glare of the sun. The county notice puckered at the edges but held. She found herself breathing too high in her chest. She took air in slow through her nose and let it go until the tight place loosened. A man in a clean vest with new boots tipped his hat as she passed. Afternoon, miss. Fine day. She nodded and kept on. Elias fell into step at her side, and the man found another stall to admire. They rode home late, the wagon light as a shell. The sky lifted and widened the way it does when heat backs off. Lila closed her eyes with the wind on her face just for the length of a breath. When she opened them, Cinder Hollow was near, and the dog was already running to meet them. Word travels fast in a place where dust hangs over the road like a ribbon. 2 days after market riders came up the wash at a canter pulled up hard and let their horses breathe steam into the afternoon. Judge Malcolm Avery set his boot down first. Sheriff Tom Gaines came with him and Deputy Reed Hollis and 3 men Lila did not know. Vivian Pike arrived last in a carriage with a chipped step parasol high as if the sun were a stain. Elias met them at the yard. He did not put his hand on his gun. He did not step back either. Lila stood by the porch post and set one hand on Scout's head. The dog did not make a sound, just stood with his muscles gathered. Judge Avery took a paper from his coat and held it up like proof. By ordinance of this county and the founder's draw, he said any woman apportioned by lot must be registered under matrimonial contract within 30 days. No such registration exists for Lila Hart and Elias Voss. The draw stands unratified. The prize reverts. Vivian's smile did not reach anything but her mouth. I told you to smile, dear, she said. Look where stubbornness set you. Lila felt her cheeks heat and cool again. She kept her eyes on the judge. I'm not a prize, she said. Her voice did not shake. It surprised her even as she heard it. Elias lifted his chin a fraction. She is not yours to take, he said. She is not mine to give. She is herself. Avery ignored him and turned to Gaines. Sheriff, perform your duty. Take the girl into custody until such time as this court settles the lapse. Gaines looked at the paper, then at Lila, then at the porch rail, as if it could tell him what kind of man he was. His fingers fretted the strap on his belt. Reed Hollis shifted in the saddle and watched Elias like a cat watches a hand near a plate. Lila felt the square of the porch board under her heel, smooth where many feet had stood. She set both feet even and found her breath. Her palms slid from Scout's head and fell to her side. The wind that came off the ridge lifted the corner of the judge's paper and rattled it like a dry leaf. Avery let that corner fall and raised his chin. Sheriff, he said, arrest her. Sheriff Gaines did not move at first. His hand hovered near the cuff on his belt, then fell away. He looked at the paper in the judge's grip, and then at Lila, as if trying to see a line he could walk between them. The yard held its breath, Scout's ears pinned back. Elias stood loose in the knees with his weight over the balls of his feet. Lila stepped off the porch. She kept her hands open and let the wind lift the hair at her temple. You keep calling me a prize, she said. You can keep the word. I am not something you can hold up to the light and claim. A murmur went through the riders like a fence wire taking a small blow. Vivian tipped her parasol and watched Lila's shoes sink a fraction into damp dirt. Judge Avery's eyes chilled. This is not a stage, he said. The law is plain. Lila did not look at him. She looked over his shoulder at the faces beyond. A blacksmith with arms like beams. The preacher with dust in the fold of his collar. A young hand who had stopped by the gate hat and 2 hands and salt lines under his eyes that did not match the weather. She filled her lungs to the bottom and let the air go. You saw the square, she said. You heard the bell when the names were pulled. Some of you laughed because it is easier than choking on it. Some of you looked at your boots. I did that for years. I am finished with it. The young hand nodded once small and hard. The blacksmith put his hand on his anvil scar and stepped closer to the fence. The preacher set his Bible on the top rail as if he needed both hands for something else. Judge Avery smiled with his teeth. Sheriff, he said, we do not take votes in a yard. Sheriff Gaines took off his hat and let the sweat dry on his brow. He took the badge from his chest and held it in his palm long enough to feel the weight of it. He set it down in the dust at his feet with care. "I will not drag a woman from her porch," he said. "Not today." Reed Hollis shifted and looked to the judge. Vivian's mouth thinned. Avery smoothed the paper and spoke loud enough to carry to the men on the ridge. "This is mob defiance. It will cost you your livestock and your roofs when the court finishes the tally." Elias breathed out a sound that was almost a laugh and not kind. "You have already taken what you could," he said. "There is nothing left here to count but people." Avery turned his horse with a sharp jerk and rode out. Reed followed. Two of the hired guns spat into the dirt and went after them. Vivian gathered her skirts, pretended not to stumble on the carriage step, then looked back once at Lila with something unreadable and went. The yard slowly let the air move again. The blacksmith cleared his throat. The preacher lifted his Bible and brushed off grit that had stuck to the leather. The young hand wiped his nose on his sleeve and looked ashamed of it. They nodded to Elias and Lila and to each other. They went back down the track 2 and 3 at a time, quiet and quick. Elias watched until the dust lay flat. Then he turned and started hauling buckets from the pump and lining them under the porch. He checked the hinges on the barn doors and stacked wet burlap by the big doors. He took the colt from the post and cleaned it on the porch steps with a rag. He handed it to Lila and met her eyes. "Only if you must," he said. "Breathe out and let your hand forget to shake." "I can do that," she said. She meant the breathing as much as the rest. They worked without talking. The sun slid and pulled the shadows to a long blue. The dog paced the yard and came back to plant himself at Lila's knees whenever she stood still too long. Toward evening, Elias made coffee and poured it into a pan so it would cool quicker. He handed her a cup, and she felt the warmth go into her fingers. He looked at the sky and then at the pasture, and then at the roof line as if listening. Night fell with sound. Not the soft kind. Hoofbeats struck the hard ground in a run that did not break. A whistle cut the air and split into shouts. Torches came first, small orange flags bobbing behind the rise. Then horses shouldered over the lip of the wash and poured toward the yard. Elias set his cup down, and the tin on wood made a sharp note. He stepped off the porch and lifted the rifle from the barrel where it leaned. Lila turned and snuffed the lamp with 2 fingers so quick the wick did not complain. The yard brightened anyway as fire came closer. Haskell, Elias said. The name was no louder than any other word. It still carried. The first torch went into the hayshed, the flame jumping with a hungry sound. Heat walked across the yard on a rush of air. Smoke reached Lila's tongue before it reached her eyes. She tasted pitch and dust and something old that had waited all summer for a spark. Elias fired once, and a muzzle flash answered from the dark by the corral. Wood splintered from the porch post and bit Lila's cheek. She felt the sting and smelled a thread of her own blood. She went to the corner where the house cast a shadow and peered along the fence line. A man slid close with his shoulders low, his hat brim down. She let the air leave her body and squeezed. The shot knocked his pistol out of his hand and sent it spinning into the grass. He swore and crawled backward on elbows, the whites of his eyes showing crescent. Good Lila told herself. She had not said the word out loud in years. The hayshed roared and caved a section at the front. Sparks blew in a skin-prickling wave. Scout barked until his throat broke, and then barked more. Elias took 2 steps toward the barn door to close it against the draw of fire. A crack split the air. He staggered and went to one knee. His hand went to his side and came away wet and dark. Lila ran. She slid an arm under Elias and pulled him behind the low stone of the well. He drew breath through his teeth in a line. "I am fine," he said. He was not. "Hold pressure," he said. The word slurred at the edges. She pressed her palm to the wound and felt heat come up through her skin as if his life were steam, and she was not strong enough to hold the lid down. The stones of the well were cool against her shoulder blades. Fire made the air writhe. In it, she heard Judge Avery's voice carry thin through the roar. "Drag her out," he shouted. He sounded thinner than he had at noon. He sounded like a man who had not slept. Vivian's carriage stood too near the heat. The horse blew and bobbed and would not stand. Vivian tried to pull him by the bridle with her gloved hands and lost her hold. The horse threw its head and knocked her down. Her skirt swept the ground where a coal had fallen. The silk caught with a small orange bite that went to a lick, and then to a mouth. A stable boy ran and slapped at the flame with his jacket. Vivian screamed a long sound with no words in it. 2 men got it out. The smell of burned cloth crawled up the throat and stayed. Lila loaded and fired again. The shot sent a rider's hat spinning. He hunched his shoulders like rain had hit him and turned his horse. The others hesitated. Men who hire out for trouble are quick to start and quicker to count the cost when the numbers change. Light bloomed at the edge of the yard, not the wild kind of the shed, but steady and held aloft. A lantern swung and held its circle of yellow. Ruth Calder walked into it, with her coat open and her hair unpinned from where she had pulled it down for speed. She did not look at the guns. She looked at the people holding them. "I sent for the marshal at Red Butte," she said. "Wires went this afternoon. Warrants follow sunup. You keep playing hero and you will meet a rope you do not control." She set the lantern on the ground and came on with both hands out. She looked at Avery and never broke eye contact. His horse sidled and tossed its head as if it had felt a snake. Judge Avery's face went stiff. He touched his wrist, where Lila's bullet had earlier bruised the bone when he snatched at his pistol. He opened his mouth and shut it again. He wheeled the horse and tried to make the turn look like a choice. 2 of his men kicked away and rode after him on the outside of the circle. The third dropped his gun in the dirt with the sound of something breaking far away. People were running up the track now, faces lit from below by flame. The blacksmith, the young hand, the preacher. Buckets passed one to the next, a river of hands dipping and throwing. The shed coughed once and fell inward, and the fire turned from a shout to a rumble as wet burlap hit it and steam rolled. The night settled a fraction. Ruth was suddenly there at Lila's side. Her fingers were already on the wound, as if she had been reading the blood from across the yard. "Move your hand," she said. Lila did. The doctor's touch was quick and not gentle. A folded cloth went in, then another. Ruth's mouth knitted when she pressed and felt where the bullet had gone. "Missed the lung," she said. "Close, but not nicked. He can keep his breath if we keep him quiet." She turned to Lila and looked her full in the face. "Fever will try to take him before morning. If it rises fast, you shout, and I will hear you from the barn." Elias's skin was slick now and hotter than the air. He tried to push up on one elbow and went gray at the corners of his mouth. Lila slid her arm behind his neck and lifted enough to get him a swallow of water. He coughed once and swore without sound. His eyes found her and steadied. "You did not hide," he said. It was a breath more than a whisper. Lila set her forehead to his for a moment. "No," she said. Ruth wrapped the bandage tight and tied a knot small and flat. She looked to the yard where the last of the flames hissed under wet canvas. Men stamped embers that tried to run free. The dog lay down and panted in little jerks, eyes still on the dark. Ash fell soft as a new snow. It gathered on the porch rail and on Lila's shoulders and in the curl of Elias's hair. The smell of pitch and wet and iron hung low. Ruth wiped her hands on a cloth and stood. "Keep your palm here," she told Lila. "Keep him drinking. If the heat climbs, call me." Lila pressed down and felt the slow drum of his heart. She counted it without meaning to. In the pauses, she listened for the sound of the wind, for the creak of a cooling board, for the lift and fall of his chest that told her what the rest of the night might ask. The fever came slow and stubborn. Lila sat through it with a damp cloth, and patience counted beats at the hollow of Elias's throat, let him sip water when he could swallow. Ruth came and went with quiet boots and cleaner bandages. Through the window, Lila watched ash drift from the broken shed and settle into the ruts like new soil. By the 3rd morning, Elias slept without heat under his skin. When he woke, he tried to sit and found the world tilt to the left. Ruth pressed a hand to his shoulder and told him to stay put. The words sounded like an order only because they were kind. He moved to the porch in a day and to the yard in 2. He carried himself different now, a short favor to one side that changed his stride. He took it without comment. The shed stood black and hollow. He and Lila pulled down what could not stand, stacked what would not splinter, and leaned new boards against old posts that still had life in them. The air had a fresh cut smell where the saw worked. Pitch sticky on their fingers. Smoke still in the grain of the wood that had survived. Lila planted again beside the porch. She pressed beans into the warmed loam and set a neat border of flat stones that the flood had left down in the creek bed. Elias measured once with his eyes and nodded. He held the fence pickets while she tied them with twine, and his knuckle brushed her wrist. Both of them looked away at the same time. Scout slept in the shade with his paws twitching and barked once in a dream. Work steadied the days. Lila mended the torn curtain she had pulled from the barn, fixed a hinge with a nail she straightened on the anvil, put coffee on before the light went hard. Elias rose early and stood still a moment to see which way the wind would push the smoke from the stove. He did not reach for her, and he did not pull back. When he spoke, he stayed to the point. A rider brought a letter with dust on the envelope and a slant hand that Lila knew before she turned it. Vivian Pike had written it. The paper smelled faintly of rose that had gone thin in the heat. Lila, it said, they say you live quiet with that man. I do not ask pardon. I thought I was saving a house. May your life be more than my choice deserved. Lila read it twice and set it in the drawer under the locket. The space behind her ribs eased, not all at once, but as if something large had stood up and walked out without speaking. That night she sat by the stove and let the kettle sing a little longer before she lifted it. She watched the steam curl and vanish. Elias started sleeping in the loft again when he could climb the ladder without swearing. He carried the guitar down one evening and set it across his knees. He touched the strings until they held a tune and then set it aside. He seemed to be listening for a sound that was not there yet. At Jericho Ridge, the market smelled of yeast and horse sweat and oranges that had come a long way under canvas. Lila traded eggs for flour and a new length of thread. A man she had seen once before in a clean vest stepped into her son and tipped his hat. "Afternoon, miss," he said. "Name is Wade Mercer. I run stock along the Little Prickly Pear. You ride in often, or do I have to invent reasons to come here and find you?" Lila felt the heat on the back of her neck. "I come when I need," she said. "I can make sure you need," he said. His smile stayed easy. Bootsteps came up behind her and stopped. Elias stood there, hat brim, low eyes steady. He did not touch her. He did not touch Wade. He looked at the man as if measuring a span of fence to see if it would hold. Wade lifted both hands as if someone had asked for them. "No harm meant," he said. "Fine day to you." "Fine day," Elias said. His tone was even. Wade found another street to walk and did not look back. Lila set the eggs down, and only then did she notice her palms had gone damp. They rode home late with sugar and salt tucked under the seat. The road held the heat into evening. A hawk rode a column of air and hung there without moving. Lila let the wind pull at her hair and did not smooth it down. Elias did not speak much through supper. His fork clicked on the plate in a way it did not when he was at ease. He wiped his hands slow on a rag and went out to the steps. The sky laid a pale blue over the ridge and held it there. Lila followed and sat with her knees drawn up shawl around her shoulders. The porch boards gave a little under both of their weight. He set a tin cup beside his boot and watched the fields. "I saw him look at you," he said. The words seemed to come from somewhere near his ribs. "For a minute I told myself maybe he would give you what I could not. A soft life. A life without a limp in it." She waited. The yard hummed with crickets. The dog sighed and rolled on his side. "I have said to myself that what you need is not me," he said. "Today I learned I cannot stand the thought of you belonging to anyone else." Lila breathed in. She tasted sage. She let it out. "You can ask me to stay," she said. "You do not have to pretend the wind will decide for us." Elias turned to her. There was nothing guarded left in his face. "I love you, Lila Hart," he said. "I am late to it and clumsy with it. It is the truest thing I have." Her laugh found its way through a line of tears. "I thought your heart was buried under that tree," she said. "It was," he said. "You pulled it up with your hands and did not even know." She put her hand over his and felt the rough of his knuckles and the small shake he could not hide. "I have been here," she said. "Not for your roof, not for your fields, for you." They stood under the cottonwood that afternoon with the leaves clattering high and green. Caleb Voss came from the far pasture with dust at his cuffs and a grin he tried to hide. Dr. Ruth Calder tied a narrow ribbon around their joined hands. She read the words, "Without church and without courthouse." The wind picked them up and folded them into the tree. Elias spoke low. "I will not take anything from you," he said. "I will hold what you hand me." Lila smiled and did not glance at anyone to see if she had done it right. "I will stay by choice," she said. "I will stay when the wind is kind and when it is not." They ate bread and honey on the porch, with Scout slumped under the table. Caleb told a story about Elias as a boy, jumping from the hayloft and landing with both feet like a fool who thought he could fly. Ruth laughed until she wiped her eye and then tucked the ribbon into Lila's palm and told her to keep it where moths could not find it. As light fell, Elias lifted the guitar and found a tune that sat easy. It was not a song with a name. It was the sound a day makes when it has gone on long enough and will now lie down. Lila leaned her shoulder against his arm and felt the low thrum in the wood carry into her bones. By the time the stars took hold, the yard had cooled. The repaired fence cast straight shadows. The garden held damp along the rows, and somewhere in it a seed split open and sent a white thread into the dark. The bell from the old chapel that Elias had hung on the eave moved once in a wind that barely touched it. The ring was small and round and true. The marshal rode in at noon with 2 men and a paper bagged in oilskin. The heat had a shimmer to it, and leather creaked loud in the hush that followed the first sight of a federal star. He stepped down in front of the courthouse, boots on the boards. A fly worried his horse, and he brushed it away with the back of his hand. "Names," he said, "Malcolm Avery, Reed Hollis, others as listed." The clerk unlocked a drawer with a small key and put his eyes on the counter. People gathered in knots and pretended to wait for other things. Ruth Calder stood on the steps with her hat in her hand. She did not smile. She did not need to. Avery walked out with his coat still neat and his face like a man who had practiced, looking innocent in a mirror. The marshal read. The judge reached for language that had always rescued him. It did not reach back. Steel touched his wrist. Reed Hollis watched the street with a gaze so flat it showed nothing. The marshal turned, and Reed saw his own name written in a federal hand. The deputy did not reach for his holster. He said one word, "All right." Then he held his hands out. Sheriff Gaines stood to the side with his badge in his palm. When the papers were done, he stepped forward and lifted the star to his chest. He pinned it slow, not as a show, as if it might break. He nodded to the marshal, and then to no one in particular. The square let out a breath it had been holding for years and did not know it. Cinder Hollow felt the news like rain that soaks in without noise. Work went on. Smoke rose thin from the stove and drifted north. Lila dug her fingers into the row and pulled a weed and set it on the pile for the hens to pick. Elias oiled the hinge on the rebuilt door with a rag and watched the drip run clean. Scout trailed after a grasshopper and sneezed when it popped away. People came by the gate. Finn Thorne with a sack of nails. The blacksmith with a new hinge and no charge. The preacher with a loaf that tasted faintly of anise. They did not talk about Avery. They talked about weather and calves and the way the river had cut a new mouth that spring and made a channel where it had never wanted one. They looked Lila in the eye and called her Mrs. Voss. In the mirror, she still said her own name first. It fit better each week. The place that had burned did not stay a wound. Lila turned ash under with the tines of a rake and left it to sit through 2 rains. By July, a shrug of wildflowers pushed through yellow faces that followed the sun from fence to barn. The smell there changed. Smoke backed off, and a sweet pepper of pollen took its place. Bees came. The sound of them filled the noon with a steady hum like a voice that has decided to keep speaking. Elias moved well most days. When it rained, he favored the side with the scar, and when it went clear, he forgot to. He rose with the light and stood at the porch rail to see how the wind braided the grass. He cut posts where the rot had climbed too far and set new ones with grit under his nails. He listened for the small click in the latigo that told him a saddle had enough pull. When he came in at night, his hands smelled of iron and pine gum and horse. They found a rhythm that did not need words to hold. Lila cooked and read and walked the creek, and sometimes rode Juniper bareback to the far turn where the cottonwoods dropped towels of shade on the bank. Elias played the guitar in the blue hour when the sky has not made up its mind. He found the same tune again and again and did not tire of it. She kept the ribbon Ruth had tied tucked in the top drawer with the locket. Sometimes she took it out and smoothed it flat and put it back. She did not count days anymore. Days. On a clear afternoon, they drove into Jericho Ridge for salt and lamp oil. Main Street looked brighter, though nothing had changed but the way people stood. Sheriff Gaines tipped his hat from the top step. There was a new notice where the old one had been. It said marriage registrations processed at the county office on request. It did not say 30 days. No one had torn the paper. It had never been hung with that force. A boy with licorice on his lip ran past with a stick horse between his legs. He burst into a neigh so real it made a real gelding lift its head. Lila laughed light and quick. A woman near the store offered apricots from a crate and pressed one into Lila's palm with a kind of pride as if she had grown it herself. The flesh gave under her thumb and bled sweet on her fingers. She ate it and wiped her hand on her skirt and did not mind the stain. They crossed the ridge on the way home with the sun behind them and the valley below wide as a hand. A hawk floated in one place as if the air had turned to glass under it. The wind came up cool through the canyons and took the sweat off their necks. Elias said it smelled like rain in the Gallatin. Lila breathed in and tasted stone and sage and a far clean wet. She let the breath go and felt it leave with no catch in it. Evening sat soft over Cinder Hollow. The fence held its straight line. The garden pulled the last light into the leaves. The bell from the old chapel on the eave rocked once and then went still. Caleb stopped by and set a bag of peaches on the step. Ruth rode up on a lean bay with a new scar on its knee and said the clinic had a donated wheel with iron ring and did anyone need it. They stood on the porch and talked until the swallows took the sky back from the bats. Later, Lila walked to the far side of the house where the cut bank falls to the creek. Char of the old shed still darkened a few rocks, but moss had seized the lower edges. She ran her palm over the rough and pulled back a dust that smelled like last year turned into this year. The word that came to her was simple: soil. The air cooled the skin along her forearms. Crickets began their careful counting. Elias found her there and stood beside her without speaking. They watched a thin line of water move around a snag and make a curl on the far side. He reached for her hand. She let his fingers close and leaned her shoulder to his arm. "You once said I came out of a hat," she said. "It still makes me laugh." "I said the hat gave me a chance," he said. "Everything since then is yours." She turned to him and the last light found his face and made the lines by his eyes kind. "You are mine because I am yours by choice," she said. Then she smiled. "I do not want to argue about the order." He smiled back and pulled in a breath that filled him. A night bird called from the willow. Scout lay down by their boots and rested his chin on his paws in a way that meant he had decided all was well. They went back up the slope. The porch boards gave and held. Inside the room kept its quiet like a promise kept many times. Lila set the locket on the dresser and did not open it. Elias tuned the guitar to the room and began that same low song. The sound threaded through the house and into the yard. Over the corral, stars began to punch through the blue, steady points that looked close enough to reach if you stood on the top rail and tipped your hand. Lila stood at the doorway with the night on her face. Dust lay thin on the road, soft as flour. She took a breath in slow and even. She let it go. Home did not close around her. It opened. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.